I was visiting with some friends yesterday who had a very difficult experience that's become too common. They had to say goodbye to their dad, who was dying, but they weren't able to be there with him when he died. They weren't able to be there with him as he spent many of his last days in the hospital because he was dying of COVID. And because of all the restrictions in place, they're being really careful. But then when it was clear that he wasn't going to be coming home, and when it was clear then, after that he was getting close to the end, they called the family in and they allowed them to come in one at a time and say goodbye to Dad, which was hard. But then they had to leave. They had to leave before he died, leaving him all alone in the room, and that was really, really hard for them, as I'm sure that's been really, really hard for many of you who've had to do the same thing. And so as we were sitting down and as they were telling me the details of how that went, it was hard for them, thinking about their dad sitting there, laying there all alone, with no one there right next to him. And what do you say to somebody who's been in that situation? Well, you might say something similar to what Moses did in verse 7 of chapter 4 of Deuteronomy, where he's looking at the nation of Israel and he's been telling them about the past, reminding them of God's goodness to them in the past and helping them apply it to what's going on in the present. And he bursts out into saying, what other nation is so great as to have their God as close to them as the Lord our God is to us whenever we cry out to him? And I don't know that there's a moment in life that we cry out to God with more desperation and with more passion than the times that we have to go through death, either our own or as we walk through the valleys of death of the people that we love. And so no doubt we cry out to God with a lot of passion and with a lot of urgency, and Moses reminds us that when their dad did that, he wasn't alone. God was right there with them. God was right there with him. He was near him. He was close to him. And there's no other place that he would rather be. We see that so consistently in the life of Jesus when God himself came into this world, that there was no place that he would rather be than with those who needed help, who were sad, who felt guilty, helpless, or weak. He came to be with us. He came to be with you. He came to go really, really far to keep a promise that he will always be close to you whenever you call out to him. A pastor friend of mine a number of years ago, he was relating the story of a time he was visiting with one of his elderly members, and she was feeling so guilty. And he asked her, well, what are you feeling guilty about? What's wrong? Jesus forgives every sin. And she said, through tears and sobs, she said, I feel so guilty because when I cry out, I said, when I go to bed, I cry out to God and I pray to God. And she said, I always fall asleep before I finish my prayer. I always fall asleep before I finish my prayer. She felt guilty about that. And he looked at her and he said, I can't think of a better way to fall asleep than to fall asleep talking to your Father in heaven and knowing that he's right there listening. In a sense, you fall asleep feeling embraced by God himself. And truly, our prayers to God are never really done. I mean, we say amen and we come to the end of our sentences and the end of our thoughts, and that's good, but there's always more to pray about. There's always more to think about. That's certainly the case in your life. It's often what keeps us up at night. Our thoughts are racing about the things that we haven't done, or the things we should have done better, or the things that are going wrong, the things that aren't right, the people we miss, the things we can't take back, the words that we should have said if we just had one more opportunity to say them. Which is why it's good that God is near us whenever we cry out to him. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, whether or not you're having a hard time sleeping, talk to him. Tell him what's on your mind. Tell him how you're hurting. Recite the things that you're thankful for, the people that you're thankful for. And if you also know how it feels to be all alone, with no other person in the same room with you, and you're in pain, then talk to him too. And know that he is near. And then someday you will also see what my friend's dad did. He was crying out to God, knowing that he's near in one moment, and in the very next moment, he saw that God was near. He saw him. He saw the God who was listening. He saw the God who answers prayers with his greatest love. He saw with his own eyes the glory of heaven and the Lamb on the throne and the one who's willing to sacrifice everything he has inside of him and everything that he is, just so you could rest well tonight, my friends, knowing that God is near and he is always listening.